and gentlemen, I think we'll get started. So I want to introduce you today to our guest speaker, Mr. Roddy Hamilton. If you don't know who it is, it's him. Not that you like the spotlight. Roddy is currently the minister at Bearsden New Kilpatrick Church down in the Bearsden near the Glasgow area. And only been there about a year and a half now, is that about right? Yeah, 18 months or so. Yeah, and before that, his main ministry has been in Abbotsford Parish Church in Clydebank. And Roddy, of course, has the privilege and the honour of training me. He's trained me in my probation year as minister. So thank you for that, Roddy. Although I don't know if the congregation want to thank you for it.
So many things to unlearn.
But anyway, so Roddy, Bearsden New Kilpatrick, formerly where most of his ministry has been conducted, has been Abbotsford in Clydebank, and a short stint as assistant minister at Greenbank in the south side of Glasgow. Roddy is recognised as one of the most creative writers in the Church of Scotland at the moment. Just should say this.
Isn't it?
Oh, it is a sad state of affairs. He is classed as one of the most creative writers in the Church of Scotland at the moment. Creative because of the use of language, the use of space in worship, and just a mixture of things and how he does and operates his worship in church on a Sunday mostly, but in very many other areas as well. He currently writes for quite a number of magazines and publications. We've got Roots, and is it Fruits of the Season they call it, isn't it?
Yes.
It is, that's what it's called, Fruits of the Season.
No, Seasons of the Spirit.
Oh, Seasons of the Spirit, right, okay, true. The reason I don't buy Seasons of the Spirit because it costs so much, it's not the cheapest, yeah. So Roots, Season of the Spirit, and it's called on at short notice to fill in for Starters for Sundays on the Church of Scotland website. And most recently, of course, the Spill the Beans magazines, if you've ever come across the Spill the Beans, which is a new venture that started a couple of years ago now, and Roddy is one of the foremost writers for that as well. He's married to Shirley and has a lovely daughter called Katie, and we are looking forward to hearing today about creative use of worship and language in the church. Thank you, Roddy.
Thank you. You really heard all the interesting stuff. It's downhill from now on. I'm Roddy Hamilton, as you know. I'll tell you briefly about my background first of all, and then the rest of this workshop is really a discussion in many ways. I'll offer you some insights and maybe some stories that have come from my experience. That doesn't mean to say they're right, it's just they're my experience and what we have found worked or didn't work in the place where I am and the culture that I've grown up in. That doesn't mean to say you can transport these ideas to somewhere else without changing them and evolving them to suit your own culture and traditions of the place of worship and style of community. One of the most frustrating things I find in the church is that we have this book of, I'm in the liturgical committee in the Church of Scotland at the moment, and we're writing a new order of service for ordination. Why, I don't know, because we've got so few ministers, we never really use very many ordination services. But we've got this new order of service, it's going to be published in the next month or so. But it's taken 10 years to get there. Because we've got to go through so many hoops about what's legal and what's right and what's wrong, etc. What you can say, what you're not allowed to say, what you can change and what you can't change as part of the constitution of the church. None of that's particularly interesting. However, what is interesting is that you have to have the words completely right that could suit every occasion and in any place, because people have this tendency not to change anything. Because it comes out of a book that says common order, it's as if we're not allowed to change any word there at all. But the whole liturgy of the church, because we're a free church, which the Church of Scotland is, there is nothing written in stone that you have to use. Every order of worship that you're given, every idea is simply that, is an idea. And writing some of the material that I've written, a lot of people want it just to written so they can cut and paste, take it straight off the page and use it. And I don't think that's a satisfying way of leading worship or of people engaging with worship, because words that are suitable for one place are not suitable necessarily for another place. You can't just take a communion service straight out of the book as if that's going to be right in every occasion. It's not like that. You have to evolve it and rewrite it. And maybe us in the church, and I'm not saying we're all worship leaders, but all of us in the church who worship have to allow ourselves the confidence to take the words that we are given and evolve them and speak them fresh in our own congregation and the place where we live and exist. I don't know about those who are worship leaders here and those who have preached. I'm sure the same is true for you as it has been for me. You can write a sermon one week and it doesn't work the second week because it's in the same place, but everything's moved. The world has moved on, etc., and the words don't work again. You'll use them again. I've done it myself. You do pulpit supply when I was a student, and you only had to really write one sermon, made sure you're a different church every time you were doing it. But sometimes you did need to be in a different church and people didn't notice. But you can't use a sermon twice. It's written for a people and a place and a time. And that's kind of, I suppose, my raison d'etre behind everything I do in worship and design. You never do the same thing twice. First time, it's radical. Second time, it's a tradition. And we've found that to our peril in many ways as well. Anyway, that's by way of background. The other bit of background is to tell you where I come from now in Newcastle in Bearsden. It's a big congregation. It's a big building. It's a very traditional building, and it's been there for many hundreds of years. And there's been people worshipping there for about 1,000 years, and people have come from churches like that here as well. However, the problem is you just don't want to be the last minister of a congregation that's been around for 1,000 years. So treading lightly is, I suppose, the way of the name of the game at these times. So the big congregation, big traditional shape, the shape of a cross, a great big chancel, pillars, dark balconies, red carpets and a pink roof. And lots of stained glass. Every window in the place is stained glass. You can't see anything in the world at all. It's all stained glass. People keep on wanting to donate stained glass to the church, and we're now filling in all the windows and all the stairwells and everything. Then we've got one bit of glass that is clear. So that's a tradition that we're part of as well. That's how people, invest and give thanks for lives that have passed and been part of the life of the congregation. But where I was before, just 18 months ago in Clydebank, it was a newly built building in the 70s. It leaked like a sieve. It had no windows at all. It had 5 stained glass windows that were literally that size. And was just full of wee shards of glass and bound together by concrete. It was a particular kind of stained glass. I can't remember what it's called, but we had 5 windows like that. And everything else was facing brick. You couldn't see out. We had lights in the windows, in the roof. There was glass in the roof that brought in some light. But a very modern building, built in a square, but the chancel was in a triangle, so everyone was in curves and everyone could see each other. It was all pews, and the glorious, well, not the glorious, but the most difficult bit of that was when it came to communion, there were still cloths on the pews, which we do still in Newcastle. But in Abbotsford and Clydebank, the pews were built in a curve, but each pew was a straight bit, and then it just kind of at an angle to the other. So, and because it was shaped in a kind of triangle like that, each pew was a different size. So every cloth had to fit only that bit. It couldn't fit anywhere else in the church. And everything was marked to know exactly where it was. And I really had this ambition that it just needed one person to spill their wine right across this cloth, and the whole thing would be scrapped. Because you couldn't get the cloths made, except you spent hundreds of pounds on one bit of cloth. And no one was prepared to do that. I was willing someone to do that, because it's such an effort to make it, to dress the church at communion. It never happened, but it tells a story of how things are fixed, and it's trying to work around these traditions and these shapes in order to bring light into our worship, make it fresh all the time, and allow people to engage in different ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you an order of service here. There we go. There's nothing spectacular about it in any way whatsoever, and I just invite you to have a wee look at it, and I'll talk about it in a wee minute when you've all got a copy of it. While that's being handed out, let me tell you, this session is not the one that's going to have all the answers and all the right techniques and all the solutions that you've ever needed. It's not going to be like that at all, but hopefully together we'll look at our own worship spaces and maybe see some insights that might be relevant and apply to where we are in life. Now, I'm handing out this order of service in no way being critical of it, because it's the order of service we use in our own, not my own congregation, it's not my congregation at all. It's the congregation where I've been called to be a minister. And in that congregation, this is the order that we use, and we use it fairly regularly on a Sunday morning. Does anyone recognise it? Does it seem vaguely familiar to you? Right. So what works about it? What's good about that sheet? Because it's been with us for hundreds of years. And it has been with us for hundreds of years. What do you like about that order of service? And it's not to be critical about it. I'm quite genuine. Let's affirm the traditions that we've got in the styles of worship that we have. So, there's your order. 5-hymn sandwich with an anthem thrown in for like the mayonnaise and a sandwich. Anything there that you think, yeah, that's why we do this. This is what we like about it. This gives me this goosebumps. Shiver up the spine. Pardon?
It's familiar.
It's familiar. So familiar.
Yeah, you need a bit of unexpected, but you do need a familiar coat hanger to put it on, so you've got a vague idea of what's going on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because the thing that I don't know what you do when you go on holiday. If you go to church, I go to church occasionally when I'm brave enough to do it. And I know what Kenny was saying, that sometimes you didn't want to go to church because on holiday I would walk up and down, and I can picture myself doing it, I've done it regularly, walking up and down the street, trying to look inconspicuous, trying to dare myself to go into the church because I'm not familiar with the building or the kind of welcome you're going to get and what the worship is like inside. The familiarity is something that is incredibly important to worship, because worship is about being part of a community and a family. And when you're familiar and know the people that you're worshipping with, that worship is very different from the one where you don't know the hymns, or I don't know what's going to happen next. Should I stand? When we were in Ireland once for a holiday, I went to church with my sister-in-law. The others were still, we had a boat and we were going down the Shannon. Anyway, the two of us went to church, the Church of Ireland, which was close to Anglican, and it was 11 o'clock, as always. And about 5 to 11 we walked into this church, a big long church. There wasn't a soul there, not a soul. And except someone in the door, and they did say the service is on. So we walked further and further down this aisle thinking she was sitting here, she was sitting there. And by the time we made our decision, we were at the front pew. And it'd be better sitting here or we'll be up in the chancel. So we sat in the front pew. And literally within 30 seconds of the service beginning, the church didn't fill up. There was maybe another 12, 15 people coming behind us. And it was then we realised the tradition of the Church of Ireland. We didn't know it was a church in Wilmington, and it was quite Anglican, and so there was lots of kneeling and sitting and standing and responses, which we knew nothing about. And trying to copy people who are sitting behind you is really difficult. So the secret, that's why I now know why everyone sits at the back when they come into a church. You can just copy those that are at the front. I can't remember why I was telling you that. Familiarity. Yes, familiarity is important to have to know what we're doing and to have that ability to engage without worrying about what's going to happen and people looking around you. So it's familiar. Anything else about that order of service that you think that kind of sends shivers up and down the spine?
The hymns wake you up.
They wake you up.
Yeah.
Is it that bad sometimes?
If you're tired, they get your attention.
Yeah. So it's a bit that it's the bit that the congregation actually responds and engages with. Is the bit that most people enjoy.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the hymns. What else do we do in the church that we actually all do together? Not a lot. We've got 5 senses, and what senses do we use? We listen. Sometimes we see. God gave us 5 senses, possibly a 6th if you want to talk about imagination. And, we come to church and worship God, and we use mainly one of our senses, one of the ways that God has enabled us, and the gifts that God has given us to engage with the world. So it's taking, that shape and that tradition and that familiarity, and how can we put into that the different senses that God has given us, and the different experiences that we've got, and the lessons from how we engage with the world. of service, the hymn numbers ought to get higher as you go through the service. Never noticed that, but theoretically they should. We start with the worship of God. And traditionally, Church of God, we start with a psalm. So that's the first, even in CH4 it's the same as CH3. You start with the psalms, so they're the low numbers, and then you praise God, and that's the kind of in the middle. Then you come to the story of Jesus, and that's the kind of 300s, if I remember rightly. And then it's discipleship and engaging with the world, and then it's sending out into the world. So if you look at your order of service, the hymns numbers should rise. Should. I can't remember the last time I did that, but theoretically, because that's the liturgy. You start with praising God, and then you move out into the world. So the hymn numbers should rise. Do people have more than one scripture passage normally?
Yes.
How do you find that works with 2, maybe 3 passages? Do you find one talks into the other? I mean, that's the idea. If we use the lectionary, for example, each season has a different focus, and at the moment we're focusing on the growth of the church, the Acts, and the other passages should speak into the Acts passage. If you just read the Old Testament, there's Old Testament passages offered in this season, but come Pentecost and the season of Pentecost, if you take just the Old Testament passages, they're not chronological because they speak into the gospel, which is the focus of that time of year. So it gets a bit complicated sometimes. We have to be honest, we use only one passage from the Bible each week. And the reason for that is we believe in the story. And we just tell that story. We tell that story 3 times thereabouts in the service. And we tell the story simply because stories, we believe, are the most important thing that we can give our children and the most important thing we can affirm in our adults. We tell the story in the all-age part by the remembered story. And that's a really important thing to me, is that the stories, as again, it's taking the words like from common ground, common order thing. You've got to use every word in that book of liturgies that the church has produced. When you don't, it's like taking the story from the Bible. We have to use every word that's there in the Bible. We'll come on to that later on in the service, but initially when we tell the story, we tell it as the remembered story, as we remember it, and it's a verbal retelling of the story. Maybe there's other things going on, there's images, there's pictures, there's people moving, there's whatever. But you just tell the story as you remember it, because that's the most important thing we can give our children. Children will go to junior church, Sunday school, whatever you call it, and they will tell the story again. And then they will do activities around that story in order to help them reinforce the remembering of that story. And then when they go home, they'll have a craft activity that they can show their parents. And the parents will say, what did you do in church this morning, or Sunday school this morning? And the parents will already know what they've done, because back in worship, the adults do the same story. But they do the story, they tell the story from the Bible, read it from the Bible, and then we retell it again through words in a sermon. So each group of people is getting the story 3 times, and it's reinforced in 3 different ways. So as we all come back together again for coffee or whatever after the service, and there's children running around, you can say to any child that's running around, what do you do in Sunday school? They're carrying a fish with them or something like that. And you already know what, so you can actually have this conversation. And around the meal table at lunchtime, you can, if you ever eat round meal tables as a family anymore, you can sit down and you can talk about what happened in church, and everyone knows what's happened in church, but they can all talk about it because it's already happened, and we're all at the same level, we're all told the same story. And as children get older and become teenagers, it's then that they can have that critical reaction to the story. Do you really think it happened like that? Or how do you think that, how can we explain that? Or can you see it in a different way? Or what was the minister saying today? Or what was the worship leader saying today about that, a more cerebral engagement with the story? So that's me explaining what we do there. We have one scripture reading. We always do a scripture background because I think it's important to give context to things. And people know why these words and why we're coming halfway through a story, what's happened before, what's going to happen afterwards, and where it fits in there. And any big words there or contextualization of it, the culture of the day, what's going on there, and that's important to give people an insight to as we tell the story. And it's quite interesting that, and that becomes often one of the more interesting parts of the service. We have to really listen for that bit, because I think people are really interested in the Bible. There's a place for a Bible study, and a place for preaching, and the two don't always go together. And so we have a bit of scripture background that introduces the reading. We share the reading together. We have a reflection, which is a contemporary reading, which is taking the reading and going off at a tangent with it, taking a thought or an idea and doing something creative. And we're going to do that. We'll talk about that in a wee minute or two. And then in the sermon, we talk about how that means, how that engages with us in life. So that's where we are with our order of service, and I'm sure all of you are fairly familiar with that kind of standard format of worship.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
how far ahead do you plan? Because the reason I ask that is the Sunday school teachers are obviously going to have to know what you're doing week by week, and that's not always easy.
No. I plan my bit of the service. Well, I've got service tomorrow.
Fair enough, but
No, but
do they know?
yeah,
do
they
they know the passage?
Yes, yeah, we use the lectionary.
Okay.
We use Spill the Beans,
Okay.
and so there's plans for at least 3 months,
Okay.
4 months in
Okay.
advance.
Okay.
I
I was just
recommend-
thinking of the poor Sunday school teachers
Yeah.
having to do things on the hoof.
I mean, you're absolutely right, yes. I mean, there's two things to say there. One is we use the lectionary, and we use the lectionary because it's really important that what we do in Yuko Patrick is being done right around the world over the next 24 hours. That sends tingles up and down my spine, that people in every language of the world, in every country of the world, is telling the same stories we're telling. I mean, that's a global church. That's the world church at its base. It's fabulous. Even talking, my hairs on the back are still standing. I think it's a fantastic thing to do. So that lection is always there. We use material that will help us engage with that, and we offer that to our Sunday school teachers. Spill the Beans is only £12 per congregation. You can photocopy as many times as you like. And so it's there. And again, you adapt it to suit your own culture. But the second thing about that is if you cannot buy the equipment you need at midnight in Asda, then it's too complicated. Okay? Seriously, because I know people have got really busy lives, and I've got a busy life, and when I sit down and I think about worship, sometimes I have my idea, at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. I think, I need some string or some glue or some sellotape or whatever. I don't have any. I can go down to Asda. It's open 24 hours, and I can get it. But quite generally, because people do prepare, and if we make, you've got to go and order this 3 weeks in advance in order to, get it from Amazon or out of Mongolia or whatever. I think the creativity has to be about tissue paper and sellotape, and nothing too grand.
But they know what you're going to be using.
Oh, they know what we're going to be using. Yes. Whether they actually prepare for it in that way, I don't know. The material's there. There's no excuse. Yeah. So that's our order of service, how we work in our congregation. Does that make sense to people? Is that something that, it's just a kind of model we've kind of grown into. The story's important, and we tell the story, we tell one story because we feel that that's enough for people. However, the other passages speak into that. There's no reason not to use other passages. We've just chosen not to. We just use one passage a week. So we tell one passage a week, and everyone tells the same thing. Everyone has the same story, no matter what age group, so that we talk about it at home. And everyone knows what next week is going to be, because that's printed in the order service as well. So the story continues, and people can say, go and read that passage. And we try and make it intriguing. We're not saying next week the passage is Luke 7:14. It's just, I can't remember what we put in for. Last week was the week before, was it last week? Last week was the great picnic. Peter saw the vision of the great big blanket coming down from heaven, and it was all the animals of four-legged animals and all the things that Peter was not allowed to eat because he was a Jew. And God says, just have a wee try, on you go. And Peter says, no, never done it. On you go, says God. Come on, I'm telling you. No, never done it in my life. I've been a really good boy. God says, eat it. And Peter says, no, I'm not going to do it. Wait, what? Tough thing. It was up in the sky again, and it was only then that it dawns on Peter, God's saying we have to go out to the Gentiles. We're not just to keep within our own traditions. We've got to, expand our horizons a wee bit. So we call that the big picnic, and the way you can come and bring your picnic blanket with you, except you can introduce it in a different way, so that it's a wee bit more engaging. So that when people read that throughout the week, and the other thing I have to say as well, is that the passage, we use one passage not just on a Sunday, but one passage of the week. So that on the Monday, I do a kind of a blog about the background to that passage, initial thoughts, and that goes onto our church website. Not that many people read it, but it's there. And then we have a midweek service, and it's the passage we use at the midweek service. We have first thoughts about that and sing about it and think about it. And then we still engage that passage on the Sunday as well, both morning and evening services. There's the same passage. We have an evening service every week, and it's the same passage, just done in a different way. It's a deeper level. We give deep thought in the evening, and we engage more creatively in the morning. If there are session meetings, guild meetings, whatever other kind of meetings, that's the passage that we use as well. So the whole journey of the congregation is with that passage all the way through the week. So that by the time you get to Sunday, people don't come up to you and say, well, they do come up to you and say, well, your hymns fitted this week. I said, well, they always fit. But because people have read the passage, they're engaging from the very minute they come into worship, because the first hymn fits. And the reason we do that now is because I remember in our previous congregation, only those who were reading the passage that day from the lectern, they were the ones that came up and said, your hymns fit this week. So they always fit. But he knew that was happening because he'd read the passage beforehand. And all the words and the symbols that gather people at the beginning linked with what he already knew about the passage, and already he was kind of, as soon as he was in the space, he was starting to think about things. And we'll talk about that a wee bit more as well. Blimey, I've said all the things I wasn't going to say. On the other side of that bit of paper, you'll see a box. Now, it's blank and the box is empty, and this is often how we design our service. And I use the word we because it's done with a few others, either students or worship group or whatever. Because particularly for festival services like Pentecost and Easter and Christmas and Harvest and any other big services that we do. We've got a parade, a wee parade tomorrow, so this is how we designed our service. We'd already looked at the passage, we knew what it is, and it's the story of Paul's second journey and getting to Philippi and meeting Lydia, the woman who wove fine purple cloth, and sharing a prayer meeting with her, and then Lydia being baptised. So we took this order of service here and we simply wrote in the box the central thing that we were going to do. And then asked the question, to get to that stage, what do we have to do in our worship? What to get there, do we sing before that, or should we be praying till we go into the space? And we work backwards. And then, when we've done that, what's the logical thing to do? Let's get rid of all the traditions that we've got. Not to ignore them, but put them to one side and say, we don't have to do that. What would you logically do after that bit of the worship? Would we sing? Would we have some activity that is in response to that, an act of dedication? Should we pray and think about it together in that way? And tomorrow, as I said, that was the passage we're going to use. And one of the central things we're going to is just tell that story and talk about journeys. And so the central theme was a talk about journeys. That was the central thing we were going to do. And what we decided to respond to that would be, we're going to have bits of cloth, purple cloth on the communion table, just squares of it in a big bowl. And so to respond to that talk of the story is for out there in the world, but here is your home. That was the kind of two juxtapositions we were going to have. Lydia found her home, but Paul had just done all this journeying thing. To bring these two thoughts together, we said, the idea is we go out and journey, but we always know this is where our home is. So we've got a big bowl of purple cloth, and people are going to rip a bit, or going to have to take a bit, it'll all be cut up already. Take a bit of cloth as a reminder that the place of home, but it's a journey where we go out into the world, we'll take this cloth with us, and no matter where we are, we've got the cloth and reminds us that we belong somewhere, as Lydia discovered she belonged, as Paul on all his journeys realised that he belonged. It's a very simple thought, but it was just a visual engagement of it. And that will be done, as songs are played, etc. So that was how we were going to respond to that. And then, Phil, once you've done that, once everyone's gathered that bit of cloth, what do you do? Well, we decided that at that point we will pray, and then we will sing again. And then we will think about the world that we're going out, and that's when the prayers of intercession, etc. will come in as well. So we've just taken a blank sheet of paper, thought of our central thought, our central activity, and worked out, if you're in that space, how would you want to respond to that? What would you use? And be free enough to do that. How do people feel about that? That's a bit more scary, perhaps. That we do go back to the traditional things that we do all the time, and that there's no harm in doing that at all. But the more often we do it, the more we realise there are other ways to respond, and it's okay to respond in other ways. And it's just building that confidence and that safety for people, that no one's going to be asked to do something that is illegal, dangerous, or hurtful. And when we say you come out for the cloth, we'll always say, now, only if you feel comfortable are you invited to do this. And as soon as you say that, everyone does it. But you say, now, I want you all to come out here. You're like, no, I'm Church Scotland. I say, there's a lesson in that as well for us. Me first doing this kind of creative, we'll call that creative worship, simply because people are moving. And it's not a big thing, but the first time we did this was in Clydebank in Abbotsford, where Come Remembrance is a big service. Because of the Blitz, there was only 4 houses left in Clydebank that were undamaged after the Blitz. So it's huge in people's psyche. Everyone has a story, and every week, for the 15 years I was there, I heard a story about the Blitz, of what someone was doing when the Blitz happened. They were under balconies, they were under cushions, they were in cellars, they were sitting in seats, a whole host of different stories of what happened. So Come Remembrance, you know, it's a big service. I could take Christmas off and I could take Easter off, but I really don't think I could take Remembrance Sunday off. And you remember what it was like. We started the service at 10:30, and there was pipes, and there was a drummer, and there was colours, and there was everything. There was everything. And the BB and the guides and the brownies all sat there. And it really was a kind of a formal service. And Remembrance is a difficult service for most people at best of times. So one year we decided, the second year I was there, thinking this would be my last Sunday, we'd created a kind of an oasis cross. And it wasn't very big, the guides helped us do it. During the service we did this wee bit of liturgy where we built this oasis cross, and that was fine. We laid it on the floor on the chancel. And later on in the service I said we're going to invite the BB and the guides to take their poppies and just put, everyone's done this, put their poppies in the cross, and we'll make this poppy cross as a symbol of sacrifice and what the sacrifice Jesus has made for us as well. And that was fine. So I explained this to the and so I spoke to the organist as well, and the eurythmics were in the charts with I Save the World Today. And I thought we could play that in the background as these young folk come forward. Now, as you know, guides don't wear poppies in their uniform. They're not allowed to wear, the scouts aren't allowed to wear poppies in their uniform. So I had a bowl ready for them. And so I explained what was going to happen. I said the BB and the guides and the brownies are going to come forward and put their poppies in this cross. And if anyone else wants to do that, then that's fine. And I said, now the organ's going to play, so we played this in the piano, started playing eurythmics. And I bent down to pick up the bowl of poppies and stood up. And that length of time for the guides to get their poppies, the whole aisle was full of people. Literally in that time, people just moved out their pews and the whole aisle was full of people. And it took the organist 16 times he had to play that song in order to get everyone to come forward and put their poppies in the cross. And 2 things happened. One person said, well, you know, next time you'll have to put the cross on a table, because I wasn't expecting anyone have difficulty bending down. And I said, well, we won't be doing that exactly that way again, because you never do the same thing twice. First time was radical, second time was tradition, and you're locked into it. So we changed it slightly. And we did every year. We did something that people could respond to, but in a different way. And the other thing I did was I spoke to the person who was right at the front of the pew, who I thought was actually glued to the back seat, because I'd never seen her move in my life. She was always there when I arrived, and she was there when I left. But I asked her why she put up for that. And she said, it's the first time that I've been allowed to respond in my own way to Remembrance Sunday, because usually I'm told what I'm made to think about it. But in this way, I can respond in my own way. And from then on, we've always done it. And I'm in a much bigger congregation now. There's 400 or so, 500 on a Sunday morning. And we still do that sort of thing, we just take longer to do it. We have different centres where you can do these things. But again, it's the ability for, and again, for the first time we did it was last year for Remembrance, I asked people why they did it, and they said, again, the exact same words. I could respond in my own way to this, because there were so many thoughts going around my head, and so many people have different ideas. This way I can respond in my own way to something. And so we don't do it every Sunday by any manner of means. We do it maybe half a dozen times during the year, the very, very most, that we ask people to come out and do something. And people do. Every time people have responded to that, which is an interesting insight for me, thinking people won't do that, but people will, given the right opportunity. And to some extent, this is, I suppose, I don't know if you've ever heard the word blended worship. Have you ever heard that term, blended worship? It's one of the terms that have been around at the moment, blended worship, where we kind of blend everything. We try and make it appropriate to every age group and every generation, and so we blend things together. And I think that doesn't work, because you don't want to dumb it down. You're not making your granny's broth with this. It's not kind of just the whiz around and it just makes everything, and it's just one bland. No, it's not bland, but it's one taste, one flavour of the whole soup. It's really more about tartan worship, where there are strands of things going through it, rich traditional things going through it, and honouring these traditions properly, but allowing them to be tied and woven together with other cultures and generations of things going on as well. On a Sunday morning, that looks it's not the easiest thing to do necessarily, and you don't do it every Sunday morning. But there are times when you allow the great traditions of our church to speak, and they speak incredibly powerful to new generations. Two things to say about that. One is that last Sunday we had communion, one of our formal communion. We have various varieties of communion, but we had a formal communion. It was a traditional one. And so I'd spoken to our organist, and they said, well, why not, we'll just use the 23rd Psalm or something like that. It's been done, but we'll do it unaccompanied. I said, can we choir do it unaccompanied as an intro, the whole lot? I said, well, all right, it's a bit long, but give it a shot. It was the most moving thing in this world. It was incredible. It started off with a soloist, a woman singing, and the second voice was a young guy that's in the choir. And then all the men sang the third verse, all the women in parts the fourth verse, and everyone in the whole choir in unison sang the fifth verse. It was just the Lord's my shepherd, and it was Brother James's air, but it was spine tingling. This huge tradition that we've got, use it in the right way, in the right place, at the right time, and it works for every generation. Because I don't think young folk in the congregation want any more than we want. When you look at worship and how we change our worship in church to make it contemporary, the thing that we change most is the music. Everything else stays the same. Like this morning, just a moment ago, the thing that was different there were the hymns. But we sang, Be Thou My Vision and Amazing Grace. So the thing we change most when we contemporize worship is the music. Everything else, we still have a sermon, we still have prayers, and we still probably have them in the same place. So what I would suggest is we do that version and start with an activity, start with something or an act of worship that engages people, brings people together, the poppy cross, the purple cloth, whatever. We'll talk about a few more of these ideas later on. But, and then allow people to respond to that. And that way we change our worship. We're not trying to make it contemporary, we're not trying to make it traditional, we're just trying to make it honest. And to free ourselves from being caught up in the tradition, rather than let the tradition speak in its own way at the right time, and have other cultural traditions being woven through that as well. For example, the response, the visual thing that's going on as well. Because in many ways, we become a slave to this liturgy here. And what we should do is free that liturgy. Because liturgy means the work of the people. That's the word. It means the work of the people. So we ought to allow the people to create the worship, work for the worship. rather than be slaves to what's already printed down there. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to emphasise that again and again. There's nothing wrong. That's our tradition. But there's different ways you can use that and create around that a way of engaging with the word that is contemporary and bring in different strands of our tradition that let it speak in all integrity and all honesty. We're not going to do anything gimmicky, we're not going to do anything clever, we're not going to do anything technological either. And I mean that because we don't have PowerPoint and screens and things like that. It doesn't work in our congregation, we've got no space for it. We really do use the sellotape and tissue version of creativity. And done in such a way that people can engage and it's available for everyone to engage in a different way. Because the one thing we forget people allow people to do is respond. We do it with the hymns, the Lord's Prayer, but other than that we don't do an awful. We sing hymn, we sing an amen at the end, etc. But everything else is performance led at the front. Okay. Let us think together about this generation, or the generation in which we live. Is there anything that sets it apart? Is there any part of the time, the era in which we live? What's different about now than 20 years ago? So much. Technology.
Yeah, all the kids have
Yes.
fancy phones with apps and tablets and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no silence.
There's no silence.
I'm
Good
trying
God.
to think. It's too fast.
Yeah.
It's my age.
Right, I'm going to write some of these down because we'll respond to them all. Yeah. No, I think it's not your age. It's not your age. It's a problem with the time we live in.
Young
There's no
people
silence.
don't take time to think. They're always
Poor concentration.
Yeah, less concentration.
yes.
So you can't talk for 45 minutes.
That's right.
Well, I'm doing quite well though. Anything else?
It's a conversation stopper now, technology.
Yes, right.
Communicating with one another, speaking to one another.
We talk to each other quite
texting.
differently, yes.
It's good in some ways, but not.
We build different kinds of relationships
Yes.
with technology than we do face-to-face relationships. That's absolutely right. Yep. Anything else? Anything that happens, that says, well, that symbolises the kind of generation that we're living in.
Well, there's more to do than Sunday.
Yes,
Yes.
More options.
Far too much to do this Sunday. Far too much to do every day. Anything else?
I think everything is so visual. People want, young people, children want everything there.
Yes. It's multi-sensory now, isn't it? You go to school and you don't, you read with pictures and you've got music in the background while the teacher's doing something else with another group of people, etc.
And that's what we're used to.
Yes, that's right. They can cope much better in that kind of busy. It can isolate things. Yeah.
Yes.
The news. What colour is news?
Technical.
Technicolor. Is it? What colour is BBC News? Red.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What did it used to be?
Blue.
It used to be blue.
Primary colour.
Oh yes, that's right. I call that the EastEnders' attitude to life.
That's right.
Because that's how people react. Sorry, I teach. But that's what happens. There are always having dramas. There's never, if something happens, it becomes a drama instantly instead of a. And I think that's how people react to things with the news and the shouting in children's programmes. Sorry, I'm going on a rant. I apologise.
That's allowed.
But at least they shout. Kids shout now because that's how they are.
Yeah.
Everything around them is loud and red and in short bits. And I can't cope with modern films because the scenes change too fast for me. I have no time to take what's happening around me.
News is entertainment.
Yeah.
Everything is entertainment. Everything we do is entertainment in some form. But I've told this story before. But when the ITV version of breakfast television started, the news background was orange. It kind of orange and faded into pink. And as soon as the news came on, everyone who was watching STV or whatever it was turned to BBC because their news background was blue. Psychology. The blue was an important, when things were coloured blue, it was important and it was formal and it was significant. When it's pink and orange, it's, well, you know, it's cartoon variety sort of thing. But now, news is red, it's less formal, it's more shouting at you, and the other channels are yellow and other colours as well. We've moved away from the formality of news and into the entertainment of news, which is a kind of insight into how we engage with our generation. We've got multi-cinemas all over the place now for the last generation. You know, you can go to the cinema 3-4 times a week, where everyone used to go and see the one film, and that's what everyone talked about. And now we're kind of, in a strange way, we're coming back to that. You know, lots more films are being released, but there are big films, and there are, remember that film? You know, where we've got multiplex, we've got all this choice, but we're actually funneling ourselves back into talking about the one big thing that happens. News is also is not any more reflective. You know, news is before it happens. Every day you'll say a report is going to be released and we believe what's going to be in this report is such and such. So we don't actually sit down and analyse things anymore. News is about what's possibly going to happen rather than what has happened. News should always be reflective. You should remember when the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, was on, and someone on CNN was sitting there with a gas mask in Tel Aviv, talking about the possibility of Scud missiles landing, and they didn't know whether they would have chemical warheads on them, etc. And that was the headlines. We don't know, and we don't know. In fact, nothing happened. You know, the Scud missiles didn't land in Tel Aviv, and there were certainly no chemical weapons around it, and everyone has just blown this great big story out of proportion. And that's our news now. We like the entertainment value. We really sit at the edge of our seats when we listen to the news sometimes. Our students nowadays, and I was a student, I used to sit outside, I didn't used to, not regularly, every so often. I would go on a demonstration, and we would sit in Sauchiehall Street, and the police horses would come towards us, but I would sit there. I can't remember what it was I was demonstrating about, but I think it was something to do with stature in education. And we would sit there, and the police horses would come charging towards you, and you would sit there, you know, because they wouldn't stand on you. That was fine, and we did all that, because we wanted to change things. Nowadays, students demonstrate to keep things as they are. Have you ever noticed? We want things to be status quo. In the past, we wanted to change things. So it's a kind of different world altogether. You've got builders and boomers. You've heard about this as the big thing in the church at the moment. Everyone in the church is a builder and boomer. 50s onwards. Builders and their boomers. Everything, they work for their money and their position and what they work, and it's all organised and it's programmed and there's a way of doing things, etc. Builders and boomers. Generation X, that's me. We hate y'all. We can't stand that. We like things all iffy, fairy and all the rest of it, and we're not going to organise anything, and programmes won't get you into the kingdom of heaven, and manana, etc. How many of us are in the church? Very, very few. And then you have Generation Y, which is the 20s now, teens and 20s. But they love builders and boomers. They got on well. Generation Y and builders and boomers got on very well. Like things a wee bit more organised, you know, planned, and they talk the same kind of language. It's us the Xers in the middle that's really causing the church an awful lot of problems. So really, you shouldn't be listening to me at all today. I'll find something older than me. So it just shows you how generations can oscillate and how they see the world completely from one generation to the next. So, therefore, one size does not fit all in our worship, and that's why blended worship, to me, is not the answer, but is taking the best of our traditions and weaving them together. My traditions as Generation X, those who are builders and boomers, their traditions, and Generation Y, their traditions, weave them together, and we can do that through visual activity, the words that we use, the shape that we have, but more importantly, more than anything else, the relationships that we build with each other, the community that we create through what we do in our worship. Number one is just there. Okay, number 2 is a wee bit bigger, and it's there. Number 3 is there. Number 4, and number 5, and that's turquoise. Number 6 is over there, it's a curly 6. Number 7 is there, it's brown. 8, 9 is turquoise, and it's a curly 9. 10 is red, 11, 12, and 13 is here. 14 and 15 are very small, I don't really see them. Big gap, 16, 17, 18, 19, they're black. 20 goes right round a great big curve to 29, and they're all red. Then there's 30, they go in a straight line that way, and they're turquoise. And then there's 40 in a parallel line with that, then 50 and 60 and all the way up to 100, and 100 starts there, 101, something over 100, 101, 102, 103, all the way up, 100, does anyone know what I'm talking about? It's called synesthesia, and it's, people with synesthesia, there's lots of versions of it, it's not contagious in any way whatsoever, and it's fine. But people, synesthesia is, I have a number line in my head, okay? And no matter what number you say to me, I can picture it geographically on a number line. Doesn't matter where it is, I can picture it. 2,464,792 is over there, it's black, okay? And a million is kind of a number, much smaller, a million's over there, and then a big curve, etc. I see everything very geographically. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, etc. So everything's very geographical. My mother-in-law, see, if you imagine a sheet of paper like that, and you just cover it in digital 2s. Like that, for example. Okay? And then, imagine a lot more than that. Then you put in a couple of digital 5s, which are just the reciprocal of a 2, etc. For us, we would take a wee while just to go through every number and work out how many 2s were there as opposed to 5s. My mother-in-law can do it instantly because all the 2s are red and the 5s are green. So when you look at a newspaper headline, every letter is a different colour. It's called synesthesia. Sometimes when you hear a sound, you get a taste in your mouth. Bubble gum, earwax, I don't know. Sometimes when you get a flavour in your mouth, you see different things happening. And no one knows what it is really, but the idea is that when we're born, all our synapses are all joined together. And as we grow, these snap. And so we get, and as these snap, we are able to split apart visual and sound and imagery and things like that. But some people, these synapses don't completely snap. And so it's as if shape and number are joined together still in me. So I can see everything, I have patterns in my head all over the place. And it's just, development. The reason I'm telling you that is not because, I'm wearing the colour 10 today, I'm saying colours, is to say that people think and learn in different ways. And so when we gather together and worship, we've got to remember that people are not thinking all linearly. We start at the beginning and end at the end, we follow through an argument and feel better at the end. Some people, like me, I need visual, I need pattern in my worship. So that's why I love that, because it's a pattern. I can create a new pattern each week with that, and that's okay as well. But I need the pattern, I need the shape, I need the flow of things, and the flow becomes colours as well. And it's the minority that do that. But there are others there who need kinesthetic learning, they need visual learning, they need audible learning, etc. A whole lot of different ways that people learn now today. And when we're in our worship, we engage in these different ways. And so when we create our worship, we have to be aware that people learn in different ways. And that's why it's good that other people are involved with creating our worship rather than just the one worship leader all the time. And why we set apart festival services as being different, because it involves these different gifts that people have. So, I want you to think a wee bit about that. One of the strands that we have in our worship is this called reflection there. We used to call it contemporary reading, but no one understood what contemporary reading was, so we just called it reflection. But the idea is we take the passage and we sit at a tangent with it. We either bring in some other Bible stories to help us explain that story. The story of Tabitha, or Dorcas, that was 3 weeks ago. Peter's in Joppa and is sent from Joppa. No, Lydia was in Joppa, I can't remember. Dorcas was in Joppa. So he came to Joppa and Dorcas had died and he raised her from the dead. Peter did. But that speaks into the story of Jairus' daughter, who died. Jesus came and rose her from the dead. But the story of Elisha speaks in the Wood of Tain, speaks into that. And then Elijah and the Shunammite woman with the oil and the flour that never ran out, and her son died. So there's a whole series of these stories. So we told that big story, that was our controlling story, was the story of Dorcas. But behind that story is a whole lot of other stories. So we told that story, had a candle, and someone told the first story. And then said, behind this story, and someone came in, took the candle and said, is my story, and told the previous story. And then the next person came in, behind my story is my story. And we just took the story back to the story of life, the story of new life, of resurrection, etc. So that way we've got a visual movement, we've got a candle that can be seen, we've got a pattern of taking the story back, but we're also being, a lot of integrity with the passage that we're taking that day because we're interpreting it with the Bible. Timothy talks about that a lot. We interpret the Bible interprets itself. And so you tell the stories of the Bible that link in with the story you're telling. And that moment is there to do that. We do it with visuals, symbols, and I mean symbols as an apple, or as a candle, or as a stone, or as a pattern of how people move or stand, rather than project images up. Now there's nothing wrong with that at all, and I don't want to say that, I just want to say you can do this without all the technology. That's what I'm saying. And it takes a wee bit for our congregation to get used to that, I have to say. You have to explain what you're doing there and why you're doing it. But in my experience, it's become one of the most interesting parts of the worship. And it's the bit that I engage with most, particularly because I'm a very visual person. So I use that. It's only one strand. It's like the yellow going down a tartan. You've got lots of greens and blues, which are the hymns and the readings, etc. But you have that kind of one strand of yellow going through, for me, which is the contemporary reading. So you're weaving these different strands together, keeping the tradition going, but building a community around about it.
Thank you.
That's finished.
You
Right.
can conclude.
So, I don't know if I've explained or elucidated anything with you. We're talking about silence. One of the big things we've done is I talk back and people said, we do this regularly every couple of months now. We get people at the end of the service just to gather and say what worked and what didn't work. And one of the things that came up regularly was more silence, please. And so...
you say to your time,
Yeah.
okay, who's leaving?
All right, thanks. So one of the things people wanted was silence. And so we put that into our service simply because people need it. Less concentration, yeah, that's true. So the visuals help people concentrate because there's more going on, etc. But it's not inundating the service with anything. And as there's so much more to do on a Sunday, well, let's do other things at other times of the week as well, not just a Sunday.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say thank you to Roddy for his very informative and interesting talk. And I'm very familiar. My horse sitting there going, hold on, we do this every week. But no, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure you all got snippets, if something, may not all agree with it or whatever. I'm sure there's been snippets there you think, oh yeah, I like that. And don't be frightened to take it back to your churches and try something out or speak to someone or whatever.